2018 was a bustling year for TVO's Ontario hubs, a year of growth as we added editors in the east and northeastern part of the province. 2019 also promises expansion and more in-depth local coverage. Here to give us a preview of what they'll be keeping their eyes on, from our studio at Confederation College in Thunder Bay, Ontario, John Thompson in our Northwest Ontario hub. From our studio at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Claude Sharma covering the Northeast. From our studio at Western University in London, Ontario, Mary Baxter in our Southwest Ontario hub. And from our studio at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, David Rockney Corrigan covering Eastern Ontario. Welcome to the show. Happy New Year. Happy to see you guys. Now let's start with the federal election, which will be held October 21st this year. David, a lot of action in your neck of the woods in Ottawa. What are we going to be keeping an eye on?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's, we're 10 months away, but the federal election will creep up on us quickly. You could see at the end of last year a couple of issues sort of emerging from both of the parties. You know that the Conservatives want to be talking about migration right now. The Liberals talked about a big tourism policy that they're hoping to unveil. So there are going to be some issues that are going to be talked about as soon as we all get going here in the new year. And you know, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a bit of a litmus test, if you will. We had in the Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes riding, which, yes, if you are wondering, that is the longest named riding in the country. There was a by-election there at the start of December. The Conservative Michael Barrett won with about 60% of the vote. So, I mean, the Conservatives can use that and find a lot of good in that. It has, though, been a Conservative riding since 2004. The Liberals were hoping to put up a better showing. Their candidate, Mary-Jean McFall, was joined by Justin Trudeau sort of in the last days of the campaign. But the Conservatives held on to that riding, which belonged to the late Gord Brown. So there are going to be a couple of more by-elections before the election in October, we think. So it remains to be seen sort of what will happen. I imagine that particular seat will remain with the Conservatives. And then, of course, in Eastern Ontario, where in the provincial election we had two NDP victories, we had in Kingston and in Ottawa. We kind of wonder here if maybe any of that NDP support may bleed over to the federal party come October.
Speaking of by-elections, Claude, there's one happening in British Columbia in February that we will all be keeping a close eye on. What do we need to know about that one?
Well, that's the riding, Burnaby South, that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh will be running in, and which is kind of strange because he's from Brampton, and recently that Brampton riding, Brampton East, opened up. But he has remained committed to run in the Burnaby South riding. And he won the leadership of the NDP back in 2017. And what makes this more interesting for people in Northeastern Ontario is that the person who placed second was Timmins James Bay MP Charlie Angus, well behind Jagmeet Singh for that spot. But 2017, momentum was going in favor of the Orange. 2018, not so much, not exactly a banner year. So what happens if he doesn't win that riding in BC? But even if he does win, there's still some speculation that, you know what, the party won't exactly be behind him. So who will they turn to next? Will they turn to Charlie Angus, who has been an MP in that area since 2004, a voice for the Indigenous people? Does he have momentum on his side? He's likable, he's popular, so that's one thing I'll definitely be following is how Jagmeet Singh does and what will happen if Charlie Angus comes up and is maybe one of the dark horses that could take over the leadership if Jagmeet doesn't receive the backing from his party.
Now, John, the federal election will have a significant impact on a lot of groups, including First Nations. Thunder Bay has the biggest proportion of Indigenous residents among major Canadian cities. Can you tell us what some of those key issues will be at stake for this population in particular?
Well, I think it's not controversial to say that the federal Liberal ambition of fixing all boil water advisories in First Nations over a period of 5 years was too ambitious. They're saying that they're not going to be able to do that. There was a framework that the Liberals had hoped to work with First Nations to get development and rights framework moving forward. On November the 14th, Anishinaabe Nation, which represents 49 First Nations in the far north of Ontario, met in Thunder Bay, and the chiefs unanimously voted to ask the federal government to cease the framework discussions. Within an hour, news broke out of Ottawa that had in fact happened. So the Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler of Nan has told his chiefs to expect that the Liberals will continue to rule Canada. There are 3 ridings in northwestern Ontario federally. Those are all held by Liberals now.
Now, Mary, I want to ask you, speaking of our leaders, our current one, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, seems to be paying a lot of attention to the Windsor area. Why?
Yes, that's really interesting, and it certainly got a number of political observers in the Southwest region wondering what's going on here. Just to recap a little bit about that, he was in Windsor on Canada Day, and then he was back for about a 2-day stint in October, which, if you look at his itinerary, that's actually a lot of time for a prime minister to be in one place that's not Ottawa. And at that time, he also promised even more visits back to that area. And so what the experts are saying about that is that the Liberals are seeing this obviously as an opportunity in the upcoming election. Although the 3 ridings that make up Essex County and Windsor have been kind of home of the NDP for the last several years, before that they were a real powerhouse for the Liberals for many years. One can't forget that the Martin family was quite dominant in Windsor for a long time. Paul Martin Sr., who was a federal politician, taught at the University of Windsor. He taught political science for years and years there. And then, of course, former Prime Minister Paul Martin was born in Windsor. So there's a lot of support in the background for the Liberal Party. It's a traditional place where they've looked for support. Also, the region is really strategically placed. When you look at the Windsor and Detroit border, it is actually the largest or the most active area in or border crossing in North America. When you look at the volume of trade that goes across right now the Ambassador Bridge, of course. And so it plays quite a key role in the relationship between Canada and the United States. I think another thing to keep in mind is the bridge building project that is finally underway there, a new bridge to connect the 2 countries as well. That's a lot of money in that region when you look at just millions upon millions of dollars being spent to build the bridge, and that will go into the local economy. So there's people thinking favorably, perhaps, about the Liberal Party, or an opportunity for them to consider them more favorably as well.
Okay, well, let's shift gears to green energy. This year marks the beginning of the national carbon tax for provinces. For provinces like Ontario who haven't adopted a system right now, what sort of changes are going to be that you guys are going to be tracking heading into 2019?
Oh, for sure. Southwestern Ontario perhaps has been considerably affected by the provincial change in policy in terms of green energy. It's certainly a place where you see a lot of wind power generation and solar power generation. And as we know, the provincial Conservatives have decided not to continue to pursue a policy to support that kind of green energy. But, you know, looking back in the provincial climate change plan, there was mention of something else, which is renewable natural gas. So it was just a very small mention in the plan. But when you look nationally as well, the federal government is working towards a clean fuel standard, a new standard, and we've known for a long time, it's required a certain amount of ethanol in gas, for instance, or renewables in diesel. But that policy is going to expand to include other types of fuel, so things like natural gas. So an expectation that you're going to have some sort of renewable gas added into natural gas. So, you know, the whole green energy, people think it's gone away, but I'm wondering, and we'll be keeping a close eye to see if we're going to see a rise of more of a green energy movement in the natural gas sector.
I want to switch to another topic, another top concern for Ontarians, jobs. Now, David, there is a new plant that is set to open in the region that has a lot of people talking. Tell me about that one.
Sure. I think you're referring to the Fahey International Baby Formula plant that'll be opening in Kingston later this year. They're planning for the end of the year, but I've actually heard that they may be ahead of schedule. And this is a Chinese company, Fahey International. They're here, they're known as Royal Canada Milk, and they will be making baby formula, 85% of which will be shipped back to China. China famously has had some problems with their baby formula, the tainted baby formula scandal from a few years back. And so this is, I think, a move from them to bring in Canada Milk, sort of give them that credibility. And the plan for this plant is to be using, I think at its height, about 50% cow's milk and 50% goat's milk. And when they had first said this, that they had planned that they would be using basically all of Canada's goat's milk supply. So they've tapered that back a bit, but it means that there is a huge new market for goat's milk in the area. So I know of some people that are maybe farming and other things, or not farming at all, who have been tempted and are now starting their own goat farms. Someone I know has 300 goats now and is thinking that they'll probably have about 500 by the end of the year. And then over the next couple of years, as that goat's milk is needed, there could be some serious winners in Eastern Ontario.
We'll definitely be looking at that one for sure. Now, Mary, I want to look at any predictions you have for some of the industries that you expect might have some of the biggest growth in Southwestern Ontario.
I would say food processing is where I'd place my bet. We've certainly seen considerable growth in the Southwestern Ontario region just over the past year. Maple Leaf Foods, for instance, has announced that it's going to be establishing a very large plant in London, a poultry processing plant. And I think they're planning on employing something like close to 1,500 people at this plant. And we've also seen in London a fair bit of expansion at existing food processing plants. And one that I particularly like is in Wallaceburg. There was an announcement several months ago now, I guess, that they're bringing a pickle processing factory there. And pickle processing, it was something that was once actually quite widespread in Ontario. There was a lot of that type of activity, but the plant's kind of closed down. But now we're seeing a return to it, so that's really exciting as well. So food processing, I would say.
Claude, what's the largest project cities in your region are vying for this year?
Well, one city is going to be very happy, the other one not so much, and that's in regards to the ferrochrome smelter that will either be built in Timmins or in Sault Ste. Marie. The original list also included Sudbury and Thunder Bay, but they didn't make the cut. Now, this plant will be serving the Ring of Fire's chromite mining project, which is in the James Bay lowlands. And Noront Resources is a developer behind that. So they've whittled down their list, and there was some talk that they would announce which city would host a smelter site, which is pegged at about $1 billion at the end of 2018, but that hasn't happened. With a new government, they're kind of waiting a little bit more to move forward with this. But whoever lands this, great news, is expected in the early stages, 300 to 350 jobs for either Sault Ste. Marie or Timmins.
John, we're going to head over to northwestern Ontario. Some big changes in the forestry industry with regulations. How does that change the jobs there?
The forestry industry was really an unsung story of 2018, partly because it happened so slowly, but the forestry collapse, the historic collapse that happened 10 or 15 years ago has rebounded. And so sawmills are back up across the region. And we're seeing investment back in forestry. Resolute was in Thunder Bay in the fall, announcing $53.5 million for its mills in Sipawi near Atikokan, Ignace, and Fort William First Nation. And they've already added shifts there now. Premier Ford was also at that announcement, and he talked about Ontario's forestry strategy, which has been underway for a number of months. Consultations will continue into the spring. But what he said was that this is going to be removing all of the red tape, he said. It's going to make more wood available, and he's going to knock down all barriers to forestry. And that will have very serious ecological and economic consequences across northwestern Ontario, and that story will be big throughout the year.
Another big story, Bombardier, Thunder Bay's largest private sector employer. Their contract is set to expire. Any implications from that?
Well, it's unclear at this time. It's certainly something we're going to be watching very closely. In 1984, that plant was down to 100 workers. In the late 90s, they were down to 200. But it has stood for 106 years, and there has always been work of some kind. So our viewers will probably be familiar with the LRT story and GO trains that are coming out of Thunder Bay. Some of those contracts have experienced very severe problems, which the company and the union have suggested are resulting from problems in Mexican assembly plants. And so there's a sense among particularly the union that we could be looking at big layoffs come spring. And should the worst come to pass, I mean, this is over 1,200 people, and that's 2-3% of Thunder Bay's entire working population. The really interesting angle is that Mayor Bill Morrow, Thunder Bay Mayor Bill Morrow, is formerly a Liberal cabinet minister, and he took a lot of the responsibility for bringing those jobs to Thunder Bay with Bombardier. And again, should the worst come to pass, he will be the one who will be having to deal with the fallout.
John, I want to stay in Thunder Bay for a minute. I want to talk about crime. We know the city has been called the murder capital of Canada, has the highest rate of hate crimes in the country, and just a few weeks ago, 2 major reports came out looking at and finding serious deficiencies in Thunder Bay police and how they deal with Indigenous people. How will these reports and recommendations kind of, how will it change how you kind of operate and report down there?
Well, again, it's unclear at this time. The OCPC and the OIPRD reports came down within days in December, and they found systemic racism institutionally running through the Thunder Bay Police Service. The OCPC report, led by Senator Murray Sinclair, then put an administrator at the head of the Thunder Bay Police Services Board, who will be managing it. That person suggested, his name's Tom Lockwood, he suggested that the board could be back at the driver's seat by the end of February, should all of the training and all of the responsibilities go forward. Police Chief Sylvie Hoth says that she is making a plan over in January to be able to roll out as many of the recommendations as she's able to do. She's going to submit that back to the board once it comes into power. But the association, the union of police officers, has been firmly rejecting the concept of racism, systemic racism within their ranks. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how she manages that and how the board administrator manages her.
Claude, while not on the same scale as Thunder Bay, you're looking into 2 inquiries into 2 deaths in the Timmins area. What do we need to know about that?
Well, back in February of 2018, 2 members of the Fort Albany First Nation, which is about 400 kilometers north of Timmins, died in the same weekend in Timmins while in police custody, a 20-year-old and an older woman. So that sparked outrage, and it led to the Ontario Human Rights Commissioner, Renu Madani, to come to Timmins on a fact-finding mission to see if there is any racism there regarding Indigenous people. And she said at that time, what she noticed was Timmins can be considered, racism there can be considered pervasive, almost normalized because of those deaths. And even not just those deaths, she said she noticed it in the streets, when it comes to housing and a number of other different areas. She made another appearance later on with the Human Rights Commission to make recommendations, and the city of Timmins was proactive on that. They established an Indigenous Advisory Committee. That was a former council and former mayor, Steve Black. But still, lots can change with these 2 SIU investigations into these 2 deaths. So we know that it could be this year, it could be a little bit later on into the year. We know either way, regardless of the findings, there will be outrage from the community or from people in neighboring nearby First Nations, and especially Fort Albany First Nation.
Now, Mary, late last year, Statistics Canada came out with some numbers about hate crimes in southwestern Ontario that revealed some troubling trends. You have a Q&A that's been released this week. What can we learn from that?
Well, I spoke to Barbara Perry, who is a hate crimes researcher, about what some of these statistics might mean. So, well, they weren't at the top of the country's lists in terms of the rise of rates. In places like Guelph and the Kitchener-Waterloo region, and in Hamilton, those areas saw significant jumps in their rates. And so, as I said, I talked to Barbara Perry to try to get some insight into what's happening here in southwestern Ontario. And it's a pretty interesting conversation. I think one of the insights or the issues that we talked about is biker gangs and far-right groups. And are there any synergies there in connection with this topic?
Now, David and Claude, at the end of 2018, we also saw Franco-Ontarians fight back against the province's French services cuts. How has that been playing out in your region?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that first. It continues to be an issue. As we saw a couple of weeks ago, there was an MPP, Amanda Simard, in Glengarry Prescott Russell, who left the Progressive Conservative Party. She now sits as an independent, and she continues on her social media to support Francophone Ontarians, and so this is not a battle that is seeming to go away anytime soon. Part of that was the announcement by the PCs that they would be cutting funding for the French university that was planned for the GTA. That funding is set to be cut starting January 15th, so that'll be playing out over the next couple of weeks. There are still a lot of people that are upset about that. This is something that had been planned by the previous Liberal government, and we know that the AFO, the Assemblée de la Francophonie de l'Ontario, is they've recently just hired lawyers. They are currently looking at their legal avenues to see what can be done to rectify what they think is an attack on Franco-Ontarians.
Claude, I'm going to ask a follow-up on there. What's the status of the Francophone resistance heading into 2019?
Well, because of after the announcement, a new group was formed in the Nipissing area, the North Bay area, called Résistance Nipissing. And that's a group that came together to voice their concerns over the cuts. And they have had several meetings. And what they did over the Christmas break was they encouraged people in town and people just outside in Francophone-speaking areas to write a wish list to their MPPs. One thing on that wish list was the reinstatement of that university. So not an email, a handwritten letter. And the thing, too, is that kind of the face of these cuts was the Nipissing MPP and Finance Minister, Vic Fedeli, who had a really good relationship and has a really good relationship with the Francophones in his area as an MPP, and even before that as a mayor. So they are kind of surprised by that, but again, it's not something they're solely blaming at all on Vic Fedeli. You got to think about the Northeast too, is that there are many cities and towns up here where the mother tongue, a majority, is French. You got to think of Kapuskasing, Hearst, Cochrane. So those cities, I spoke to the mayor in some of those cities, and they're really upset with this, and they're going to be a strong voice moving forward. You also got to think, too, the Franco-Ontarian flag was created here in Sudbury, actually here, where I'm standing at Laurentian University. And there's lots of French media, too, that feel like they could be impacted by this. There's French newspapers here, radio and TV. So they're going to be moving forward. They want their voice to be heard. They're making these wish lists, so this is something we will definitely be following in the new year as it progresses.
Now, on a lighter and more local note, David, there's a school slated to close in Kingston that has a special connection not only to Ontarians, but to you. Why will we be hearing about this school in 2019?
Sure, and you call it a lighter story. If you ask my mom, she would disagree. So KCVI, Kingston Collegiate and Vocational Institute, is slated for closure in 2019. It is known as Ontario's oldest public high school. I think it's one of Canada's oldest public high schools. It was founded in 1792, if you can imagine, well before Confederation. It boasts some alumni like Sir John A. Macdonald, Don Cherry, every member of the Tragically Hip, several MPs and authors and mayors and David Rockne Corrigan. That's me. So I also graduated from this school. My parents went to this school. It is I'm sitting here at Queen's University. It's just a block away, sort of essentially on Queen's University's campus. And it was a decision made a couple of years ago by the local school board. It was controversial then, but now there is a new school being built. So most of this is behind us. But I know that when that school does officially close later this year, that there will be some memories and if not a little bit of tears perhaps. So that's one thing that I'll be watching certainly locally here in Kingston.
Just FYI, we hear that David Rockne Corrigan guy does a really good work. Just saying.
Oh, okay.
Now, Mary, what is this about self-driving shuttles that residents in London might be seeing in the near future?
Well, if one of the city councillors, his name is Michael Van Holst, has his way, he would like to see the city adopt self-driving shuttle services. These are being piloted now in Edmonton and actually has gone into service in a city in Ohio. In London, what to do about rapid transit has been an issue that has been burning through the city for several years now, and was certainly last year a key issue in the municipal election. And so the new council is trying to figure out how to move ahead, and they will be inviting someone to talk to them about some of this new technology to see if that's something that they should be looking for in the future.
Now, Claude, you're working on a unique story that sounds like something like a movie called Island Keeper, about a town with a population of one person. I hope that person is not you by yourself in Sudbury, but tell me, what do we need to know about that?
Maybe one day, Jan, but have you ever heard of Cockburn or Cockburn Island, Jan? Probably not, right? Well, this is a place that is right by Manitoulin Island. The last census said the population was 0, but no, there is an island keeper there, Darren Rogers. I got to speak to him recently, and he is there on this island for the majority of the year, by himself with his dog Max. And the only time people do come over is the odd time during hunting season and during the summertime when the 80 or so residents come in and make it their vacation home. So I do plan on going on there over the next couple of months or so, but I can't get there right now. That's because I need to take a snowmobile there, and the Lake Huron, the North Channel, kind of has to freeze up first in order for me to make it there in one piece. So that's something I'm really looking forward to covering.
Well, it looks like a lot to look forward to. Always a pleasure. And this year we'll also be looking at adding a new person to the team. We'll be expanding and adding a new Indigenous editor to the Hub's team. So we'll look forward to that and as we carry on in 2019. Again, always a pleasure. John Thompson in Thunder Bay, Claude Sharma joining us in Sudbury, Mary joining us from London, and David Rockne-Corrigan from Kingston. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy New Year, Jan.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.